you stumbled upon the fastest BJ you're going to find on the rear of a 2000s Chevy truck, SUV, GMC, Cadillac, all that. It's going to be the same. So rear brake pads and rotors changed. The tools needed to get the job done might vary according to model, but pretty much the whole process is going to be the same. Here we go. First, remove the wheel. Obviously that needs to be done. If you can't do this, just stop here, move on to the next video. Now with the wheel off, we're going to go ahead and remove the caliper itself. Before you get to this part, you might want to look at everything, make sure you have all your tools together. If you need any tools or parts, look for a link in the description below to purchase those. And you will find links in the description below to the full video that answers a ton of questions you're probably going to have when this is all done. Calipers off, it's going to be supported on the frame, suspension, somewhere where it's not hanging from the brake line. Make sure it's supported really good. It's not going to fall off or anything like that. This is a really light caliper and I highly doubt you're going to break it if it does fall, but always make sure it's well supported. Next, we're going to remove the brake bracket. This is the bracket that holds the brake pads and all that. Just remove these two bolts on the back side, get the bracket off, set it off to the side. We're going to rebuild that or clean it up and get it ready for reinstallation shortly. With the brake caliper bracket off, we could easily remove the rotor. If your rotor is stuck on, a couple things. Make sure your parking brake is not on. That'll be a huge problem if it is. And also, if you have a problem, you can whack it with a hammer, or like I used the bolts from the caliper slider pins. They fit perfectly in the threads of the rotor. Be careful not to destroy these bolts so you don't end up giving yourself more work. But if your rotor starts coming off with a couple easy turns, go ahead and press it off with these bolts. With everything completely disassembled, sitting on the ground, let's take the brake pads out of the caliper bracket, set those off to the side. We're going to use those shortly to compress the piston into the caliper. Remove the hardware kit off of the caliper bracket. Let's clean everything up before we start installing everything. Using a wire brush, we're going to get the brake dust and road grime off of the bracket before we put the new hardware kit on. Just make sure it sits properly inside the bracket. Now that the bracket is cleaned up, setting off to the side, remove the slider pins, get all the gunk cleaned up off of these slider pins. If you need to, clean out the bores in the caliper bracket itself. Set everything off to the side. We're going to get ready for assembly of all this momentarily. Before we do that, let's clean off the hub surface of the axle. We need to make sure that there is no burrs or high or low spots on the actual hub, so that the brake rotor sits nice and flush on this hub. It doesn't make it wobble or not sit flat or evenly when we reinstall everything. With that cleaned up, grab the slider pins. We're going to lube these up, insert them inside the brake caliper bracket. Make sure they go in and out of the bracket easily. You don't want these to bind up or have any spots where it doesn't go in easily. So make sure these move freely in and out before you put them actually onto the vehicle. Set the bracket and the lubed up slider pins off to the side. Grab the rotor, install it onto the axle. I like to use a lug nut or two to hold the rotor in place while I reassemble everything. It makes it so much easier so the rotor's not wobbling around, and it's easier to load the caliper and everything over the brake pads when we do that in a little bit. With the rotor on there, let's go ahead and open the cap on the brake fluid reservoir. We just want to twist it off, set it right there. You're not going to take it completely off. Just make sure if any fluid comes back up into the reservoir when we compress the piston back into the caliper, it has somewhere to flow to. You don't want to blow any seals or anything like that when you do the caliper compression. And when you're following my steps or the way I do BJs, you do not need to bleed the brakes when you're all done. If you think I'm wrong about that, let me know in the comments below. Now the reservoir is open. Let's go ahead and grab the caliper itself and a compression tool along with some old brake pads. We're going to use the old brake pads to actually push the piston back into the caliper. You don't want to use the new brake pads because you don't want to destroy them, put any grooves in them or like that. So make sure you use the old brake pads when we're doing this. Push the piston completely back into the caliper as far as you can. Set it back onto the frame. Make sure it's not hanging there. Grab the bracket. We're going to go ahead and install the two bolts holding the bracket onto the axle. When we tighten everything down, we're going to tighten these down to proper torque specifications that you'll find in the links below. Install the new hardware kit. Make sure you buy brake pads or brake sets that include hardware kits. You always want to make sure you get a new hardware kit. Never use the old stuff. With the new hardware kit in, everything's clipped in. It was all cleaned up so they sit nice and flush into that bracket. Grab your brake pads and install them in the same position that you removed them. Make sure the wear indicator is in the same position. This is one reason why I recommend to take a lot of pictures when you're doing BJs, so that you know how to reassemble everything. If you get stuck somewhere, you're like, where did it go? You have pictures of everything. And to do this brake job, it should take you about 2 hours to do both sides of the rear, maybe 1.5 hours to 2 hours. So it doesn't really take that long. And the cost of these brakes at your local automotive store for the pads and rotors, you're looking around $250. If you look for links in the description below, I'll try to give you some links that'll have a complete brake pad and rotor set for around $150 to $180. Just make sure you have the proper vehicle, year, make, model, and trim all set so you get the right parts. With the brake pads in, grab the compressed caliper and insert the caliper over the brake pads. When you put the caliper on, make sure you don't hit the silencers or the shims on the backside of the pads and knock that off and push it onto the rotor and not notice it until later on when you're driving. You're like, what in the world does that sound? And you notice that you knocked those shims off. So make sure you take notice or take care of putting the brake caliper over the brake pads. Now that the caliper is over the pads, we get the sliders lined up onto the caliper. Insert the caliper slider bolts through the caliper and into the slider. And again, we're going to tighten these up to proper torque specifications, and they'll find a link in the description below for that. With everything reassembled, everything's tightened up properly, you're almost done. But don't forget the reservoir up front. Before you check the reservoir, you need to pump the brake pedal. Pump it maybe 3 to 7 times. Get a nice, firm, stiff pedal, and then double check that your brake fluid reservoir needs to be topped off or not at that time. Tighten the cap up on the reservoir, spray some brake clean up there, get everything cleaned off, and now go back. You can put the wheel on, make sure everything looks good, and that's it. This will be the same, if not very similar, for a ton of Chevy, GMC, Cadillac trucks and SUVs. If this video did help you out, make sure you comment below with the year, make, model, and engine size of your vehicle. Let everybody know what this video did help you on, and make sure to check out those links in the description below. There should be tools, parts, the complete videos of the install and the disassembly process, everything. You'll find it in the description below. Thanks for checking out Scotty's Hobbies. I'll see you guys on the next hopefully helpful video.